The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity educator. In some, that means I support people in aligning their actions with their values through the coaching, and we do training on how to use our emotions wisely so that we can take the messages that they are so significantly trying to point out to us, and yet not to be held captive by emotions, not get stuck in ruts, so that we can keep gaining clarity and moving forward in our lives. And diversity education is somewhat self-explanatory. But if you want to look at any programs I offer, whether it's training or coaching or emotional wisdom training, you can find the samples of them. I do a lot more that's on my than what is on my website, but my website is knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. So no matter when you're listening to this, I want to say Happy New Year. This is January 2024, the first week of January, and time to set kind of a new tone and open my heart and mind more for using this platform to benefit as many people as I can think of. And I always need help. I love having guests who help me think and thought leaders and broaden. So today I'm very excited. It was very intentional to ask Susie Herrick to be my first guest of January 2024. Susie, please join me. And I'm going to read your introduction from the back of your beautiful book. And people can look at the book cover while I'm reading the back because I want them to see it. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Susie Herrick is a licensed, let me see, can you read the title? Your Story is Your Power. The subtitle is Free Your Feminine Voice. Susie Herrick is a licensed psychotherapist, an Enneagram teacher, meditator, and trainer, as well as the author of Aphrodite Emerges, which I happen to have here because I read this as soon as I can get my hands on it. Amazing, also powerful, empowering story. And today we're going to focus on Your Story is Your Power, Free Your Feminine Voice. And I know you will talk about your co-author, Elle Luna, in a few minutes. But I wanted to first thank you for agreeing to, before we dive into the book, just using a minute or two to send compassion, love, holding compassion, honor all the people who are being destroyed and devastated and their relatives by wars, no matter where they are. Compassion for the people whose children have been held hostage, kidnapped, and worse, murdered, and also the 20 plus thousands of Palestinians and others murdered in Gaza, and the spreading of the war. Just, I really can get very emotional and paralyze myself when I look at so much adversity and conflict and horrendous things happening to thousands of people. And I need people like you to help remind me what I do and why I can coach and train people to bring us out of feeling powerless, and to remember to find ways where we can express ourselves, express our compassion. And there are tangible things, like I figured out, for gift giving for my tradition, I donated to World central kitchen to feed starving people in very dangerous areas. That's an amazing group. And Borders Without Doctors. So I just want to turn it to you because I know you're a powerful healer. You help so many people get to the other side of suffering. So I wanted to give you time to share your thoughts on this.
Mm. Well, it's a great topic because I think so many of us have been shaken to the core about this, and it's hard to find that place of peace inside when there's so much agony. It's like that sort of survivor's guilt is really
Yeah.
hard to digest what the news is. And I reminded when we were doing a lot of research for this book and Aphrodite, which was I had to delve really deep into all this stuff around misogyny and what that looked like. And I remember needing just like, sometimes days just to do nothing and sleep because it was so horrific, a lot of the stuff. And I think that, the stuff that we're reading now and we're hearing and, firsthand, I mean, I have some family that were firsthand right there in the conflict. And it was just horrific hearing the stories. And took me a long time to digest that. And I think the perilous comes from the shock. And the brain just doesn't know how to cope with it. And so we sometimes need to shut down and digest it. It's like how do you accept the unacceptable is really the challenge. And then when that happens for me, if I have to work at accepting the unacceptable, it's then when I have peace with that, then I can have more agency about what to do, which is really why I wrote these books, and Elle, worked with me on them. And then we wrote the second book together because it was, we were both just astonished at, even in looking at our own lives, how much misogyny we had experienced. And I think, one of the things that culturally we're dealing with is we're swimming in a lot of violence around us and a lot of violence all over the world. And so it's become normalized. And I think that when it's really against your own culture to be around that much violence and having to swim in it all the time, it's really hard to not feel hopeless, feeling despaired, without hope. So it takes time, but there are, I find that having compassion for me when I go into shock, like I'm in shock right now, and that's okay. It's going to take, just my understanding is when that brainstem, that part of our brain, that's what they call it, the lizard brain, but that part of our brain that gets triggered when we're, feeling in danger. It takes about 20 minutes to walk out of that part of the brain. Like if you're in an argument with a partner or your kids or something, and it gets, takes 20 minutes to really come out of that. And so at least if you are reading the news or if you're doing anything like that and you're really triggered, give yourself about 20 minutes to relax and walk out of that part of the brain, because there are not a lot of options when you're in that place. Fight or flight freeze or fawn.
Yeah.
And the lobes are much more creative. So when you give yourself that brain rest. Yeah.
Thank you. That is so well said. And I think it's probably refreshing for a lot of us to hear that sometimes we need to give ourselves compassion to just shut down for a while until we can rejuvenate and become contributive again. And I also feel I balance that out with feeling like I have the freedom and the privilege and the safety to shut down. And I know some people do not. It's a constant ongoing trauma. But it's not helpful to them for me to take on the secondary trauma. And then
yeah. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. So let's dive now into your story is your power, free your feminine voice. And would you like to start? Because I know you always give Elle credit. Would you like to start to tell us a little bit about Elle Luna, since she's not here with us today?
Yeah. Well, just to say that Elena is an extraordinary designer and artist, and um, she has the skill to see the gems in people and then bring it out and express it in some way. And so uh, she does a lot of extraordinary work for the world in that capacity. And if you look her up online, you'll be like blown away how impressive she is. So I was really honored to get to work with her. And if you'll, in the book, you'll notice that there are paintings that she's done in watercolor that encapsulize the moment of things that we were trying to express. And they say, a painting's worth 1,000 words. And I feel like that was so key about trying to bring about this part of us. It's so precious, the feminine part of us. And, it's been asked to be lost. It's been asked to be kind of go underground. And, but actually it's one of the most powerful things we have. Anybody has. And so she was able to do, well, anyway, I can go on about Elle, but she's amazing.
Well, before this book is so gorgeous. I mean, the paintings are striking, the color striking, and I'm literally going to hold it up and flip through some pages because everyone should have the joy of just absorbing the colors I find it really accessible. There's so much neurodiversity in our world, and yes, adults too, not just students we teach at schools, but I find it really helpful to know no matter how you take in information, it's super. You can just feel the even the beginning of how powerful our own stories are and the motivation to like, yeah, I want to get to know myself more. Yeah. Yes, I want this. But before we do that, I want to ask you, can you define misogyny? And not everyone in the world knows what that means or is familiar with that term.
Well, simply put, it means the hatred of women, the hatred of feminine, the hatred of it. Yeah, simply put. And one of the things that I noticed is, and that we put this in the book, was that there's a quote about, when fishes are swimming in warm water, they don't really know that they're swimming in water, but then the acquisitive fish might see an air bubble go by. And we've been swimming in the water of patriarchy as a planet globally. And with that has come extreme misogyny. And so it's hard to see it because it's all around us. And so when you start to notice it, it's very disconcerting. But it means that there's a hatred of the feminine. And it's an odd thing to hate because it's what brings people into the world.
Yeah.
And we also, the earth is considered Mother Earth. So does that mean we hate her? And, it's one of the books that we often referenced was a book called Misogyny, the Oldest Prejudice, and by Holland. And it's true. It's the oldest prejudice. And it's the oldest sense of being ashamed or hating something in us, because we all have it in us.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that for me, the reason it was so important was the minute I started to addressing my internal misogyny, which was big, and countering it and pushing back and saying no to it, I started gaining some of my femininity back. And I was so delighted by it. Like, I was like dancing. I was like, "Whoa, this is cool. This energy is so lovely." And I started accepting the part of me that I thought was not okay, that I was sort of like, I'm a person who loves color, who loves to do, I love to decorate, it's one of my favorite words. Not that it's specific to that, but it's like the part of us that gets really creative and in love with the beauty of life. And why not get to swim in that? But anyway, I'm digressing.
No, it's all relevant. And thank you for the definition. And I want to underscore it. It is odd. It's so incongruent to like hate half of let's just say if I divide it like might be oversimplification, but like half male, half female, part male, part like that and it oppresses everyone, right? And like, I
Yeah.
think that's one reason gay men have been so targeted, because people are hating what they're allowing to emanate from them that is perceived as feminine. I think
Yeah.
that's part of homophobia against men in particular, or women who may be lesbian or bi or trans. Anyway, I think some of that's part of like whatever is feminine. There's such an deeply ingrained pattern to like stamp it out and disapprove. It's so odd.
It is odd. We had a woman in one of our workshops, we had a woman come and teach dance, and the dance was to address this concept of that the hip is sort of the lost or the forgotten body part for women, right? We're so always trying to
Yeah,
literally carve, our hips down, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And she teaches hula, African, and belly dance. And so we brought her in to teach a combination of that. And one of the women took me aside afterwards, and she said, "I felt so connected to my hips for the first time. I had to go outside in the hallway and cry
Oh,
because there was a new connection to herself." And that really moved me, because we just, why deny these great parts of us? Yeah,
for
but we do.
sure. Yeah.
So this,
eh,
and your story is really the process with which Elle and I worked together to develop the process and did a lot of research and also our own experience of how to get to the feminine voice because it's been so stamped out.
Well, how do we get to the feminine voice? Tell us.
Well, we use the metaphor of the labyrinth, and it's considered one of the most ancient, like they call it, a form of spiritual technology, which I find
Mhm.
interesting. But there are two main design pieces to a labyrinth, which is first is the spiral, and you can see spirals designs in caves that are like 40,000 years old. So it's like it was an early sign of the spiritual journey going inward. And then so that's part of the labyrinth that's going inward, right? And then the other piece is the meander, and the meander is the digestion part, right? How do you work slowly to get to some place and give yourself time to digest? And so if you notice in nature uses this Fibonacci spiral a lot, like in conch shells, and when you look at curled up um, ferns and things like that, there's a spiral sequence that's mathematically really interesting. But anyway, there's the spiral, and then there's meander in nature, and that's like in rivers and in our body. We have a lot of meanders with their intestines and our muscles, all sorts of things that meander. And so micro and macro in nature, you have these two kind of ways of getting places. And so the labyrinth has that quality to it. When you step into a labyrinth, you meander and spiral your way into it. And so we use that metaphor as a way to take time to release parts of us, to release the dampening voices, the dampening thoughts, the cultural piece, the personality piece, those parts of us that keep us from
Mm.
ourselves. And so that you can sort of shed them as you go through the labyrinth. And we start with each of those. So, culturally, how is that voice dampened?
Mm.
That's a significant piece. Like if you look in your own culture, and I personally, when I did the research, I looked at my own culture and how we dampen women's voices. And that's to me like, women are supposed to be obedient and beautiful and all these things and do everything. And the most obedient woman, ironically, even though we think we're speaking out, the most obedient woman, and Naomi Wolf talks about this in her book, is what was appealing, the one who can stay the thinnest and the most, together.
Mm.
And it's like, where's the release of the self, right? And then there's the family piece, like what aspect of our families has misogyny. And I think I might have mentioned this the last time we talked, but I went through my family genealogy to kind of figure this out because I noticed that the women in especially my father's side of the family seemed to kind of shake a little bit if they did something wrong.
Mm.
And that always struck me as really strange. Like, why do they have this like little shake? Like, like, do they fear something deeply? Is there a homicidal fear there? There was no blatant, domestic violence or anything, but there was just that little shake. And so I did some research in the family tree, so to speak, and I found that my direct ancestors were the guys that ran the Salem witch trials. And so that was a big piece of understanding where some of the unconscious family transmission process was showing up in me, right? And then personality, like what part of my personality keeps my feminine side in check. And I tend to kind of go to sleep to myself and tend to just like get so involved in other people and so involved in the other that I forget who I am and I forget what I'm feeling and I just sort of numb it out. And so I tend to, like now, try to figure out how to stay awake. But I notice myself, even when I'm in situations where there's a very powerful man in the room and I have to work not getting really small, because that's the defense mechanism, get really small and sort of disassociate. So these are the things that we looked at and how to each, to parse out what's keeping us. And this friend and I, years ago, we sat at a restaurant. My friend Rachel and I sat at a restaurant and we wrote down all these things that we could think of that would come out of us just when we thought about ourselves being women. And the misogyny that came out was really disturbing on this placemat. I still have the placemat.
Wow.
It has maple syrup stains on it, but I still have it. And because it was so poignant to see, like, women are, they have to be valued if they're beautiful or they're rich or they're mothers, and that's it. Other than that, forget it. And or they're valued, that's all they're valued for. And other than that, they're just disposed of. And I had to look at how I was writing that down, and I thought, wow, that's not kind to me. But it was so enlightening for me to see that, because I was doing it to myself. Because always people say, well, if you're worried about misogyny, then you're doing it to, you're a misogynist. But I realized that I wasn't a misogynist to other women. I was just a misogynist to myself inside. And that's the biggest, most terrible type of misogyny, I think.
Yes.
Because then to comply to it, we just, entrain to it. So I don't know if that's what you're asking about. But
definitely right on. Yeah. When we internalize the conditioning, sometimes no one else has to try to control us or make us be useful to them, because we've internalized it's the programming so well, just similarly to like racism or other forms of conditioned oppression, that sometimes we don't need someone who was trained to be like an agent of oppression, so to speak, even if they were good people, but patterns are learned and we certainly act them out unless we get
they're very deep. They're incredibly deep. When we were doing our talks, like we would go to different, venues and talk about the book. The interactions with the men were so interesting because, they'd say, well, one guy finally said, well, that's your culture that there's misogyny. And then I looked at him and I said, well, I can't speak for yours. And he was Indian, right? And he just went, oh, like you could see the experience of, oh my God, I didn't even think about what I was saying, right? And one of the talks we gave, I think at Wisdom 2.0, one of the men stood up and just started crying about how women had been kept out of his religion. And he said, I feel like there's so much has been lost. And I think that's the thing. It's the loss. We're grieving the loss of the participation of this. And I think that's the hard part, anyway.
Yeah, it's a loss for everyone.
Yeah.
I would like to find, feel free to continue talking. I should have marked it, but I'd like to read the page that you two wrote on about the labyrinth.
Okay.
Here we go. The point of a maze is to find its center. The point of a labyrinth is to find your center. And if I could just read this paragraph.
Sure.
See the colors, everyone? Yeah. I know some people are listening and not viewing, but so you wrote, Elle and Susie wrote, In the labyrinth, there are no roadblocks or tricky turns. The path flows continuously like water, spiraling and meandering as it goes. It is not a direct line from one point to another, but an organic, evolving process that takes time and moves to its own rhythm. So important for the meandering, right? Similarly, the path through this book is designed to help you spiral to the center of your story and then out again, giving you ways to digest what you discover and to create space for new insights to emerge. And a sweet last sentence. May the meandering, renewing, and turning path of your story continue to guide you as it has guided us home.
And the thing that I would say about this is that, relating to what the first thing you talked about tonight, which is that when you get to these internal, these parts of us that save us off from ourselves, that when you release those or you confront them and let them go, you actually get to have more agency because you actually get to know yourself more. And it's really hard to describe when it happens, but it's like an energy comes out that is really unusual. It's like when you talked about meditation, actually, I was a mediator. That's what I taught mediation. And it was like when I would notice there was a moment in a mediation when both people said their story and then we train them how to hear each other. And so to get enemies to hear each other is really amazing, because once someone feels heard by their enemy, the amount of energy that comes in the room, it's almost like otherworldly. There's all this kind of warmth that shows up. And sometimes you'd get, people coming in and you'd swear they were going to kill each other's firstborn, and then they leave making dinner plans because of that moment. Right. And that's the internal experience of getting to talk to that part of you that's been so unheard. That alchema moment of the release of that is really energizing. And that's why, that idea of knowing thyself is so powerful. And like, I think it was Aristotle who said that, but she brings it up in the Matrix, right? The oracle, Temet Noske. This is what it is, right? It's knowing yourself, because then when you can really fight and talk to the internal demons, and this is why I think Gandhi was so interesting when people say, is this person evil? And he'd say, I don't believe that people are evil. They can do evil things, but I would never judge anybody because I have those devils running around in my own mind. And it's those devils that we have to open the door to those devils, I think, to really understand this. And I learned this because when I'm really angry at my father for many years, to being so hard on my mother. He was really hard on her. And when I finally confronted my own internal misogyny, I had so much more compassion, but I also had so much more agency to confront him because I'd confronted myself.
That's amazing that when you release, you realize how much energy you are using to like repress or keep it down or keep it in or not look. It is once you pass through whatever release of pain it is and like get to the other side, so to speak, it's incredible how much new energy you have. And
it's amazing. Yeah, I experienced it in order to get to the point where I could talk about it, because I'd never experienced it before that moment. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, for sharing that a personal example.
Yeah. And when it's asleep in the family, like my father, he was asleep to it, right? It was so automatic. And I remember when I was in college, this is how old I am, but when I was in college, and it was just before personal computers came out, and I needed a typewriter. And my brother was 4 years younger than me. And my father said, what do you need for Christmas? And I said, I could really use a typewriter, because I'm having to go in the library late at night and use the typewriters and borrow typewriters. And, I said, Mark has a typewriter and he's in high school. And my father said, well, that's because Mark has to type his papers. You see, like, it was like he couldn't conceive that I had to type my papers, even though I was in college, because that's not where his head was. But once that I was able to confront him years later, to wake him up to this, like how we think. And that's part of being in the water, right? It was so automatic that boys needed more tools to get through school than women did, right? Because it was assumed that women didn't really need it, right? Which it's got now, culture is different now in many ways in this country. Um, but these really subtle, weird things are part of our everyday. And you know, one of the talks we gave was, and I mentioned this. I said, you know, still you'll see in movies, you'll see even women saying this: "Don't be a girl." Like they use the insult to a man is to call him call him feminine or a girl. Like that's just being a girl. And that really struck me, is that that's okay in locker rooms, right? And so I said this once, and some guy was so shocked because it's like, we really do that. But yeah, I mean, you can see it in a lot of places. And I find it really offensive on looking at a lot of TV. It's like it's in everywhere. And so why do we use that as an insult? Because I would never say, oh, don't be like a Chinese person, but I might tell you, like, don't be a girl, right?
Exactly.
Why is that okay? Right? It's not.
Yeah, we're so blind to it.
Yeah. And that's okay, because that's part of the water we're swimming in. And how do you see the air bubble that suggests that there's air out there and not just water? So there is a field out there where there is a feminine voice.
That's good. The metaphors really help.
Yeah.
The images. I just want to share with people, because it's helpful for folks who might be able to access and get your book someday. I like it. I like outlines. I like to see. I just want to read out loud how y'all have broken this up into parts. Part 1, how we got here.
Mhm.
Part 2, how you got here. Part 3, the center of your story. Part 4, and it's nice how it goes this way.
Yeah.
Your part 4, who, can I read this? Oh, why feminine power is the best way forward. Part 5, where we go from here.
Yeah.
And then the epilogue. So can you add more about the transition from one to the other, just to
We start out with because we didn't want to go into the real tough stuff about misogyny, because it's everywhere. You can read about it. It's so disturbing. And even the wars right now, you can see things like rape is used as a tool for fighting. And misogyny is a big piece of war.
Sure is. Horrible.
And so we thought maybe that we could sort of address it from something that's a little easier, a little more familiar, which is the fairy tales. And remember, this book was written before the Barbie movie, which I think is brilliant with this too, which is, women are taught to play with dolls, to be a mother, and then the Barbie doll stands up and said, well, she's different because she has a job. She's got her own house. It's very interesting. But the fairy tales really teach us that we're supposed to be kind and good housekeepers, and not complain, and there's they have a lot of teachings in the fairy tales, and you're supposed to, of course, be beautiful. And so we took a look at that, and how that perpetuates this kind of ideal, right? And how to kind of start at that beginning place and then dig deeper and go into each of our own cultures, because you go from sort of the general culture to our own culture. And each person is raised. I was raised in California. I mean, talk about having to be thin and beautiful with no flaws and never age. Supposed to be in California, right? And which I love now. Like, people like Annie McDowell are saying, I'm letting my hair grow gray. I'm embracing this, right? But the ugly woman, or the woman who's not complying to that, I mean, it's a very difficult place to be in, because it's culturally so bad. I mean, I used to do a lot of diversity trainings, and we'd ask people to kind of write a list down of, we'd write a list of like different populations, and then when we talk about this in the book, we write a list down of different populations. And so we had people write people of different religions, people of different ethnicities, people of different skin colors, and then people of different professions. And different body types. And the ones that people unconsciously were the most prejudiced to were people that were fat, the people that were like supermodels. Like people that were fat were lazy, and people that supermodels were, stupid. And then politicians, they're criminals. Like there was just like those are the time. And then computer programmers at the time were a real big lash out place. But I found that really interesting. And I think that, if a woman is not good looking or is not quote unquote appealing, it's like it can be a fodder for any type of insult. People don't seem to have a filter for that.
The witches and the fairy tales.
Yeah, the witches and the fairy tales are a great example of it, right? And these women, the witches and the fairy tales were actually originally, disease-ridden women who literally were dealing with facial distortions and color discoloration and things like that. So, I mean, this is the part of it. It's like, how do you find out how you've judged yourself, right? That's the main crux of it, is how have you judged yourself? Because the more that we judge ourselves for, what we're not supposed to be. And I think I remember my understanding is Steve Jobs, before he died, he really wanted to make sure Frozen was produced and put out there. And I think that was really what Frozen was about, was really to try to see like this person who's been repressed and then, unleashes. It's like that. So that's why we did the book structure as it is to get to that place, that core place, and then be able to come out of the core and have, how do you work with the agency after that?
It's such a brilliant piece of work, because you have this covered with creativity that just like your soul, your whatever your words are, your chakras, your energy, your brain. You just want to absorb the colors and the designs in our paintings. And then, we also need structure. Like we love structure for a pathway. And since you mentioned Steve Jobs, can I read the quote you have from Steve Jobs? And you said, as recounted by Thomas Higbee, journalist. Okay, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. I'm trying to hold this up. Is the storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come.
I mean, that's why, the story we hold about ourselves. I mean, 20 years ago, neuroscience came out with some great research, which if you kind of sum it up, talks about how, it's important to have a coherent narrative, internal narrative. And because of that, your children have an easier time attaching to you. And it's really, that's why, your story is your power, because the story you tell yourself about yourself. And I would say this because the beauty of being alive, right? When I meet with clients and they tell me their story, I think this is the poetry of your life. That you're angry about this moment, or that you are, upset about this, or that you're joyful about this. That's the poem of your life. And so when you bring out parts of you that you have, disparate parts of you that you have deemed on okay, and you get to re-engage with them, it's like you get more coherent and easier. It's easier to relate to people because you have more compassion for yourself. And it's interesting to me because the more that I do this, the more also capable I am of having more appropriate boundaries and more appropriate structure in my life about what works for me and doesn't work for me. Because I have
which
more
benefits which benefits everyone. The more clear you are about what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and the better you communicate it, the better I'm able to see how to be your friend, and how I could possibly grow watching how you have set boundaries or learned about self-care, self-protection, and telling your story.
Well, I learned, it took me years to get this, right? Which is that I have the personality type that thinks, oh, I'm supposed to sacrifice myself for the betterment of humankind. I'm supposed to have everybody else feel love. But I didn't realize that I should be in that equation of love. So that I had to love myself.
I remember that feeling at one point when I was really diving into this deeply in my early 20s, and I read Mary Daly's book, Gaian Ecology.
Oh, uh-huh.
Such a powerful education on if anybody wants to get a grasp of worldwide centuries, millennial old misogyny. She's got concrete examples from all over the world. I remember after reading that digest, and I was taking an art class in photography, and I remember I used that book as my project and just took all kinds of photographs, just totally absorbed. And when I came out of it, I had this feeling of like changing from like a flat paper doll being to like
Oh,
becoming
yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, oh my gosh, I am a whole entire human being in and of myself, the way I see other people. It was just an incredible.
That's a great, great metaphor, going from second two-dimensional to three-dimensional. Yeah, because
It's
you
what,
realize that you're a being in space and that you have impact and that, yeah.
and that you
And I think
matter,
that's
and you,
hope for the feminine, right? Is to bring it back, bring her back into the three-dimensional space.
and to trust that it does benefit everyone. It's the opposite of harming or hurting. It's supporting everyone's empowerment and everyone's growth, kind of even more exponentially.
Yeah.
It's a creative energy, creative supportive energy. I wanted you reminded me. I know there's we have like 8 more minutes, and you could say so much more. But can you touch on enneagrams and like the types? Um, just anything you feel like would be useful to share
Well,
about
that's a
that.
huge topic for that.
That's a
That
huge question.
yeah, but let me tell you how we use it in the book, so that might be useful. But it's to look at
Perfect.
how, in order to really be in relationship or we be in society, we develop personalities to interact, and it's kind of a tool. But what can happen is with these personalities, they can become fanatical. The traits, and so in that definition of fanatic, right, is that someone who loses sight of the goal but redoubles their effort, right? It's that part of us that hangs on to ways of interacting. And like for me, it was I'm sacrificing myself all the time, and that was a way to interact, right? I was the good kid, right? And I found that I had to step out of that role and into taking care of myself and not allowing people to like take me over, kind of thing. And we all have these types in our personality structure. And the Enneagram is just a generalized roadmap of that. And it gives you a way to kind of relax that part of us that can get fanatical. And so that's why it's one of the few typologies, actually the only one that really teaches you what people's drives are like, what they're motivated to do and why. And so it's a very great way to learn compassion. And so it's a big topic, but that's why we used it, was to understand the personality and how the personality staves off the internal vitamins, right? Like for me, how my personality staved off my own inner feminine and how much of a vitamin I needed that, and how my personality staved off my own agency. Those were the things. And so when you notice this, and some people have the opposite personality to me, and then what does that look like? But the Enneagram helps describe that, and it gives you a way of it's a really unusual tool because they don't really understand how it works, but I found it really amazing. So it's really up to you, but that's one of the things that we used in the book to describe that piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it's far beyond like a list of your traits or character or
Right. Right. It's a whole system to it's a system to promote evolution.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow,
It's
that's
I
powerful.
found it really useful in my life. Just really useful. We all have our tools, right? And how to and it's also helped me with a lot of compassion and having compassion for other people's approaches, right? And so I have much more way of dealing with people because I understand them. There's certain personality types that use confrontation all the time. And so how do you look at that, right? Because I always found that so offensive, right? And now I understand it more. So I can work with someone like that with more compassion. And so it's a great tool. Mm.
Yeah, it feels good to also support other people and like you're doing and cultivating tools. You can just it's like a multiple benefit.
Yeah.
We I thought it might be fun. Before we have 5 more minutes, and I know I'd love to hear like the sort of your at the end your closing thought on how to move forward and keep hope. But I wondered, I think it might be really useful if you could just like share an example more. You've been sharing great examples of a fairy tale, from a fairy tale, just any kind of message from a particular fairy tale that comes to mind that you have.
Well, like, one of the main fairy tales is Cinderella, right? I mean, she's
Mhm.
so ubiquitous, and she touches such a deep part of us, and I don't know why. This kind of part of us that's stuck in a corner and who is not seen, and has no agency and has to be completely disciplined, right? And so that fairy tale I find really meaty in all this because what does Cinderella teach us? And you know in popular culture, she's somehow the most beautiful, even though she's covered in dust, and she's the kindest, and would never hurt a fly, right? That kind of character. And so you want to take a look at, like, we had to take a look at what these fairy tales were trying to express to women about how they should be. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got to just be beautiful and look great in a pretty dress and be really obedient and kind, and be the kindest person in the room. And it's not that not to be kind, but how does that stave off parts of me that need to be different than that, right? I don't want to be the most beautiful woman in the room. Or I don't want to be those fantastic person where I want to enjoy my life. I want to look pretty because it makes me feel exuberant, or I'm not doing it for appeal. I'm just doing it because it's fun. That's a different thing, right?
Yeah, it is.
And like, I think it was it's Alice Miller. Can't remember which. I always get Walker and Miller mixed up. So one of them, Walker Miller, but I think it was Miller. She talks about when she was little and her dad came home and said, okay, I'm going to go to the fair. And I said, which one of you am I going to take to the fair? And she was pretty young. She stands on top of a chair and says, take me, daddy. I'm the prettiest. Right. And it's like, some point that part of women gets, you know, it's like the rug is pulled out from underneath us. We're not supposed to stand out. We're not supposed to have pride. We're not supposed to say, I am great because I'm this way, right? And so that's what I'm interested in, right? Is how we've stopped that. And so however you can figure that out, because we need it more than ever now for people to
Mhm.
stand up and say what they think, And I love that great bumper sticker that says, no well-behaved woman has ever changed the world, right?
Yeah. Wow. So, before we hear your closing thought, I wanted to ask, do you want to let people know how they can find your book, or if
Sure,
is there
it's
a way
really
people can?
easy. Just you look me up at susieherrick.com, and you can get access to my books, or you can look up, El Luna. She's, they're associated with both of us online, and you know, it's pretty easy. No.
susieherrick.com or El Luna.
Yeah, El
Okay,
Luna's
so
extraordinary. El Luna does this great thing called the 100-day project if you want to get creative, where they do
okay,
a creative thing every day for 100 days. It's starting in, I think, in a month, so it's worth checking it out. Yeah.
I will. So we have 1 minute, and I want to give it to you, and then I'll just thank everybody when you're finished with you.
Yeah. Well, I one of the things that I end the book with, and I just love, is I had this dream, and I felt so gifted in this dream, which is that it was a dark night coming out on the dark sand, and I think it was somewhere like in Scotland or Finland or one of those places, out on the beach, which was dark volcanic sand, and there was this boat, and it was in like midnight. There's no light, no moon, and I got on the boat with all these people, and then we went out in the water, and I turned and I saw this like tsunami, this huge wave coming. And so I turned to the people in the boat and I said, there's a huge wave coming. And they said, oh, no worries. And then the boat, if you can see my hands, it's like the boat went in the curl of the wave and then came out the other side, no problem. And
Wow.
I woke up from that dream and went, oh, that's about the future. we are coming across that wave, but we can do it. We can do it. And so that's why I ended the book with that, because I felt so emboldened after that dream.
Oh, thank you for that. Oh my gosh. I thank you for being here and for creating this beautiful piece of work. And I can't wait for more people to enjoy it at
Thank you.
susieherrick.com. And I want to thank also my engineer, Rebel, who's awesome and always there for me, and our producer, Dean Piper, and all of the listeners and viewers. And may your year start out well. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate